We've had a wonderful evening last night at the Sturm Museum. We're going to have another one tonight. Our current presenter is going to be Rosa Parks tonight, but not today. Today she's going to get together about African culture and storytelling and music, which is going to be wonderful. So her name is Becky Stone. Becky comes to us from North Carolina. She has been doing these tablets of Chautauqua Talks for how long? A long time? 20 years. So I think she knows what she's doing. Anyway, she went to Vassar, Villanova, and she's here in Grand Island today, again, to talk to us about African American culture through story and song.
Great.
Yes, so I can use my hands and my body, which I love to do. And what I brought for you is a story concert. And it's all African American except for the last little bit that I want to do for you. And we're going to start with a West African welcome song. And you know how it is with things that are in a foreign language. You never really know if the translation is correct unless you speak that language. But when I've checked, it's simply a welcome song. And I have seen African dancing with gestures for that, and I thought, ooh, that's just way too much to ask an audience to do. So I cut out all but 2 gestures that go with the song. And I will sing a line and do the gestures, welcome, and this gesture is showing the visitor, the stranger, the pathway to take to their village. So it'll have these 2 gestures, and I'll sing a line. Fanga lafia ashe ashe. And I would like you to echo with bringing it down at the end of the line. So it would be Fanga lafia ashe ashe. Bringing the 2 of you so close there at the time. And then the other words will be Kiwa alewa ashe ashe. And then you would echo back Kiwa alewa ashe ashe. So let's try it. It's very short. We're not going to spend a long time on this. So. Fanga alafia ashe ashe. Fanga alafia ashe ashe. Great. Kiwa alewa ashe ashe. Kiwa alewa ashe ashe. And then the end is ashe ashe. Ashe ashe. Sing it again. Ashe ashe. Ashe, ashe. One more time. Fanga alafia, ashe, ashe. Your turn. Fanga alafia, ashe, ashe. Kiwa alewa, ashe, ashe. Kiwa alewa, ashe, ashe. Ashe, ashe. Ashe, ashe. Ashe, ashe. Ashe, ashe. Thank you for singing a welcome to each other. There will be a few things where I will certainly be applauding you because I will be thinking about your participation in these stories and songs. The first story I'm going to share with you is the first story I learned for formal telling of stories. We're all storytellers. We all tell, what happened today, or you remember that time. The difference between someone who gets up in front of you to tell the stories is that we work on them. We work on crafting them, finding the right words, the right gestures, and even work on finding the right order in which to tell stories. So, but I'm going to start with this story that I learned by going to the National Storytelling Association National Festival. They changed the name. Back in the day when I went, it was the National Association for the Advancement and Perpetuation of Storytelling. Yes, for short. So when I went to Naps for the first time, I heard a North Carolinian woman named Jackie Torrance tell this story. And it was the first time since my childhood, and having seen, some of you may be old enough to remember this, Song of the South, a Disney movie that featured Brer Rabbit tales. I don't remember anything about the movie except the black man's happy round face and all the cartoons. I know there was live action in that movie. I don't remember what it was. And then, you know, as the civil rights movement moved along, that all of that fell out of favor, and I never heard any other Brer Rabbit tales. Jackie Torrance specialized in those tales, and this was the first one I heard her tell. It does not feature Brer Rabbit. Joel Chandler Harris, a journalist who eventually, you know, the bulk of his career was at the Atlanta Constitution, the newspaper there in Atlanta. But he wrote down not only the stories that he remembered black people telling when he was living on a plantation, but he also went around and collected stories. And his volume has over 400 Brer Rabbit tales. Well, we would call them Brer Rabbit tales. We call them Uncle Remus tales, who is a totally fictional character. And the stories, you know, they're not all about Brer Rabbit. You know, this one is not about Brer Rabbit. I think I will tell one that is. But this is about Brer Possum. And if you were to look it up officially, it would be called Brer Possum's Dilemma. But when my children and I heard it, we just called it Brer Possum and the Snake. Brer Possum was walking along a trail in the woods one day when he heard a voice call out. And that voice said, "Help me! Help me!" He couldn't figure out where that voice was coming from. So he walked back, retraced his steps along the trail, and saw that there was a hole right in the middle of the trail that he quite naturally had walked around. "Help me!" He looked down, and there, in the bottom of that hole, was a great big old snake with a huge rock a-setting on its back. "Help me!" As soon as Brer Possum saw Brer Snake was down there, he turned around and started walking on, minding his own business. But the snake had seen who had peeked over the edge of the hole, knew that possums were a little soft-headed and a little soft-hearted as well. So Brer Snake called out again, "Help me, Brer Possum, help me!" "What? What do you want from me?" "Oh, Brer Possum, you saw that this big old rock is on my back. Well, it's been on my back for 3 days. I've been stuck down here and I can't get it off. I need you to get this rock off of my back." "Get that rock off of your back? How am I supposed to get that rock off of your back without putting my hand down in there? And then you'll bite me. I know you'll bite me because you're a snake, and snakes bite." "Brer Possum, I'll die if I stay under this rock. I promise, I swear, I will not bite you. Please." "Well," said Brer Possum, "all right." And maybe not as dumb as we like to think possums are, he went over and got himself a big long stick. And he brought that stick back and wedged the end of it between the snake and the rock on its back. And the stick was long enough to come up over the edge of the hole. He could push on it like a little teeter-totter. And when he did that, it popped the rock right off of that snake's back. So Brer Possum took the stick, threw it off to the side, and went on minding his own business when the snake called out again, "Brer Possum, please come back here and help me." "What? What do you want from me? I already got that rock off your back." "Oh, but Brer Possum, I've been under that rock so long, I'm too weak to get out of this hole. I need you to help me get out the hole." "Get out the hole? How am I supposed to do that without putting my hand down in there and then you'll bite me?" "I know you'll bite me because you're a snake, and snakes bite." "Brer Possum, I didn't bite you when you got the rock off my back. I'll die if I stay here. I promise, I swear, I will not bite you. Please." "Well, all right," said Brer Possum. He went over, got that same stick, and this time he jammed it down into the bottom of the hole, and then he stood back and watched as that snake made its way up the stick and out onto the trail. So Brer Possum, he went on minding his own business, but the snake called out again, "Brer Possum, oh, come back here, please, and help me." What do you want from me? I got you out of that hole. What more do you want?" "Oh, Brer Possum, I'm so cold. I can barely move, and I'm afraid I'll be stuck out here on this trail. And so Hawk will come along and spot me down here and then swoop down and eat me out. You wouldn't want that to happen to me, now would you?" "Well, no." "You got to help me." "How can I help you?" "I need you to warm me up." "Warm you up? How am I supposed to warm you up?" "Well," said the snake, "you could put me in your pocket." You must think I'm dumb or something. No, I am not going to put a snake in my pocket. You'll bite me. I know you'll bite me because you're a snake, and snakes bite. Oh, but Brer Possum, I'll die if you leave me out here. I promise, I swear I will not bite you. Please. Well, all right. So Brer Possum sidled over real slow and easy. And then he grabbed that snake behind its head and he put it in his pocket. He had a snake in his pocket, and it hadn't bitten him. So Brer Possum started walking on down the trail, and pretty soon he forgot all about that snake. And pretty soon that snake warmed up, made its way up out of his pocket, under his shirt, across his furry belly, out the neck of his shirt, and then it bit him. You snake, you! Why did you bite me after you promised you swore you wouldn't? And the snake turned to Brer Possum and he said, "You knowed I was a snake when you put me in your pocket. And that's why you don't never trouble. Because trouble will trouble you." Uncle Remus tales. And this one was very popular as well with my family. I ended up telling that snake story. I lived in the woods of western North Carolina, at the edge of a farm that has several hundred acres. It's not my farm, but we rent, and now we were finally able to buy some property from them. But I'm surrounded by these woods, and there were several families, and we all were stuck out there, miles from Asheville and miles from town. So we had our own little play group to take care of our children as they were growing up. And inevitably, on my watch, when they were all at my house, we'd be walking out, taking a little walk in the woods, and we'd see our first snake of the season. And they would come running back and tell me about, because they were always faster than I was always with the slowest, that there was a snake up there on the trail. And so I said, well, we're not going to mess with that snake. And then I told them that story that first time, and every year after that, when we saw our first snake, they wanted to hear about Brother Hassan. It's just a good story. And I hope you'll think that this is a good story too. It is a Brer Rabbit tale, but it's also Brer Raccoon, and bullfrogs. And I need you to help me to be the bullfrogs. So the bullfrogs always say their line 3 times. So I'll say it, and then we'll say it together 2 more times. And I might change the way I say it, and I hope you will reflect that, because there are lots of bullfrogs in this story. Raccoon loved frogs, as did his missus. So he'd go down to the pond every evening and get himself some frogs and take them on home, and she'd cook them up, and they would eat succulent frog legs for their supper every night when the weather was warm enough for frogs to be there. Well, the frogs did not like this nightly shrinking of their numbers. So they had a meeting where they made some plans to stop it. And their plan was to post the largest and the loudest of the bullfrogs out there along the trail that led to the pond. And he would call out a warning. And then that would get as far as middle-sized bullfrogs who would call out a warning. And then the littlest little bullfrogs would call out a warning, and they would all have time to hide before Brer Raccoon got there. So they put it into operation that night. And Brer Raccoon, carrying his tow sack, was walking along down the trail when all of a sudden he heard it. Here he comes, here he comes, here he comes. And then the middle-sized bullfrogs called out, here he comes, here he comes, here he comes. And the teensy-weensy bullfrogs called out, here he comes, here he comes, here he comes. Whoosh. And they all hid. And by the time Brer Raccoon got there, he didn't see any frogs. And he searched through the tall grasses and under the lily pads and into the shallows of the water. He went home that night with an empty tow sack. And his wife was not pleased. She said, well, we happen to have some frog legs left over from last night, so we can eat tonight. But don't you come back here without any food for supper again. So they ate that night. And the next night, Brer Raccoon headed down towards the trail, and he was a little more than halfway there before he heard it. Here he comes, here he comes, here he comes. And then he heard, here he comes, here he comes, here he comes. And then the teensy-weensy bullfrogs, here he comes, here he comes, here he comes. Swoosh! And he searched, and he searched. And for the second night, he went home with an empty tow sack. And Miz wouldn't even let him into the house. You go sleep by yourself until you can bring me some food. So he went out and found himself a hollow log and slept in there all by himself that night. And then he sat on that log, just pondering all day about what was happening, how could he get there and get them frogs. When who should come along for evening's fishing? The Brer Rabbit, with his bowls hung over his shoulder and his little big fox. Yes, sir. Why, howdy, Brer Coon. Why are you so down in the mouth? Oh, Brer Coon told him what was happening. And Brer Rabbit said, well, what you need is a plan. And I got a great plan for you. Just a minute, let me think of it. Yes, I want you to go down there and start frogging, you know, just the way you would normally do. But then I want you to grab at your heart and act like you're dying, and then fall out flat and lay there stock still until I tell you to get up. Oh, that's a wonderful plan, Brer Rabbit. I don't understand it, but it's a wonderful plan, and I'll do it. So, Brer Coon got his toe sack and wandered on down the trail, and he was no more than halfway there before he heard a big bullfrog. Here he comes! Here he comes! Here he comes! And the little-sized bullfrogs, here he comes! Here he comes! Here he comes! And the teensy-weensy bullfrogs, here he comes! Here he comes! Here he comes! Sploosh! And they all hid. And Brer Coon did his usual hunting around through the tall grasses and under the lily pads, and then he kind of grabbed at his heart and fell over flat on his back, four little paws sitting straight up in the air. And the evening sun was going down, and it was getting hotter and hotter, and bugs were crawling all through his fur. And he was thinking, where is Brer Rabbit? And finally, Brer Rabbit came up to the pond, baited his hook, threw it out in the water, and was sitting there, and then saw Brer Coon, pulled his line out of the water, went over and looked at Brer Coon, and then he started crying. And crying real loud. And all of the little frogs in the pond came up. You could see them in the water, and all the bullfrogs from the trail hopped up, and the biggest bullfrog got right in between them, looked down at Brer Coon, and looked out at Brer Rabbit. And then he asked him, what's the matter with him? What's the matter with him? What's the matter with him? Oh, said Brer Rabbit, he's dead, my best friend in all the world. But you know, he asked me before he died if I would make sure he was buried in the place he loved the best. And that was right here, where every night he would go frogging. So I guess I'll bury him. And then the big bullfrogs, well, let us dig it. Let us dig it. Let us dig it. All right, said Brer Rabbit. And so all the bullfrogs got out of the pond, and they started digging. Digging and digging, until that hole was about 3 feet deep. And Brer Rabbit asked them, can y'all jump out of that there hole? And they looked up, and they all said together, believe we can. Believe we can. Believe we can. Oh, well, then it's not deep enough. So they dug and dug until it was about 6 feet deep. And then Brer Rabbit asked them, yeah, that's looking mighty fine, but you think y'all can jump out of that there hole? Believe we can. Believe we can. Believe we can. Oh, Oh, well then, said Gray Rabbit, it ain't deep enough. Keep digging. So they dug, and they dug, and they dug, until that hole was 12 feet deep. And they looked up at Brer Rabbit, and they said, is it deep enough? Is it deep enough? Is it deep enough? I don't know, said Brer Rabbit. You think y'all can jump out of that there hole? No. Believe we can't. Believe we can't. Believe we can't. Well then, it's deep enough. Get up, Raccoon, and get yourself a passel of frogs. So Raccoon took his tow sack, jumped down there, and filled his sack with all these exhausted little bullfrogs, leaving out a couple of males and females so he'd be sure to have frogs the next year. And then he got Brer Rabbit's help in getting them out of the hole, and he took them home, and his wife was so pleased, even though it meant she was up all night cooking and canning so they'd have enough frogs to last them through the winter. But that, ladies and gentlemen, is how Brer Rabbit outsmarted the bullfrog. Thank you. All right, we're going to do this short little nursery rhyme. I think just about in all cultures there are little things you do with babies and small children, hand claps and little rhymey things. This I learned from a librarian in Asheville, and she got it from a record made by Ella Jenkins, who, if you go online and listen to Ella Jenkins, she's an African-American woman, I'm not sure from where, but she has, all of her records are preschool songs and rhymes and hand claps. And this one is called Did You Feed My Cow? And even if some of you know it, it'll be a quick little review, because I will ask you, it's a call and response song, which is, or rhyme, which is traditional African-American kind of participate. I really feel as though that's something that is special about African-American culture. If it's traditionally African, I do not know, but participation in anything and everything is really an important part of our culture, even if I never, as a middle-class African-American, I grew up in Episcopalian. I was not a member of churches, but where they would cry out, "Amen, brother! Hey, sister, yeah, preach it, tell us. That's a form of participating in what's happening. It also keeps you tied into what's being said up front. And in Haiti, traditional tellers have, the teller says crick, and the audience says crack. And I have a story for you. Crick. Crack. Okay? And through the telling of the story, the teller will say crick. Crack. And that way, they kind of guarantee that everybody is really in there and listening. So I feel as though, participating in things is a cultural contribution that Africans brought into our American culture. But anyway, I'm going to call to you, and I'm going to have a sip of water to make sure I can do it. Did you feed my cow? And like the very polite people you are, of course, you say, yes, ma'am. Yes. And I'll ask you that 2 times. And then I'll ask, what did you feed her? And you will say and show corn and hay. I throw it out, corn and hay. And then I'll ask, did you milk her good? And the answer is yes, ma'am. And I'll ask, how did you milk her? Squish, squish, squish. And I'm assuming most of you understand. There's some children, I can see they're going squish, 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 and they have no idea what it's referring to. And then I'll ask if my cow got sick. And unfortunately, the answer is yes, ma'am. And I'll ask, how did she die? And this is your chance to be dramatic. You have 3 beats to go, or whatever you want to do. And then I'll ask if the buzzards come. Did the buzzards come? Yes, ma'am. And then you show the buzzards by flopping their wings. Flop, flop, flop. And I will cue you, prompt you, as we go through. So, it's very short. I need to feed my cow.
Yes, ma'am.
I need to feed my cow.
Yes, ma'am.
What did you feed her?
Corn and hay.
I say, now what did you feed her?
Corn and hay.
Well, did you milk her good?
Yes, ma'am.
I like you know you should.
Yes, ma'am.
How did you milk her?
Swish, swish, swish.
I say, now how did you milk her?
Swish, swish, swish.
Well, did my cow get sick?
Yes, ma'am.
Was she covered with tick?
Yes, ma'am.
How did she die? Listen, now, how did she die? Did the buzzards come?
Yes, ma'am.
For to pick her bones?
Yes, ma'am.
How did they come? I say, now how did they come?
Flop, flop, flop.
I say, how did they come?
Flop, flop, flop.
Bravo! Okay. All right. I'm going to tell the story and hopefully open and close it with a song that I got from Virginia Hamilton's first, I think it was her first collection of African American folk tales. And the collection is called The People Could Fly, and this is that story. She talks about it being a coastal story along the Outer Banks, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, around there. But I worked with an African American actress who said that it was also a story that she heard growing up around the Gulf Coast. She grew up Louisiana, Arkansas, Alabama, down around there. She grew up and lived in those different places. So I've told it lots of places. It does paint a picture of slavery. I've told it to kindergartners and preschoolers, and they love the story. They are totally drawn into the story. I find it a story of hope. I've told it at funeral gatherings. So the people could fly. Take this hammer, carry to the captain. Feel free if you wanna. Take this hammer, carry to the captain. Take this hammer, carry to the captain. Tell him I'm gone. Tell him I'm gone. And if he asks you, was I running? If he asks you, was I running? If he asks you, was I running? Tell him I was flying. Tell him I was flying. They say the people could fly. Say, long time ago, the people in the Africa knew magic. And they could step up on the air like they was climbing up on the gate. And then they'd spread their wings and they'd fly. To see their bodies and their wings silhouetted black against the blue sky. Then the people were sold into slavery. And they shed their wings. It was too crowded on them boats, you know, to be carrying wings. And they forgot all about flying, even though the magic was still deep inside them. They forgot about it when they could no longer smell the sweet scent of Africa. And it got so many people were coming over with the dark skin that they couldn't tell those who could fly from those who couldn't. One who could was an old man. We'll call him Toby. Another who could was a young woman, stood proud and tall. We'll call her Sarah. They worked for a man who called himself their master. And they worked in the fields for that man from sunup to sundown, from can see to can't see. And they worked hard. There was a man called an overseer who sat astride his horse and watched all the people working in the field. And if he saw anyone slowing down, he'd point his finger at them. And a man called the driver would come over with his whip and crack that whip across their back. It was a slice open kind of pain, that whip. So they worked faster. They had to. Now Sarah was hoeing along the road with her baby strapped to her back. And then the baby started crying. Well, Sarah couldn't stop working and take care of that baby like she knew she should. She couldn't nurse it. She couldn't comfort it and hold it. And she did the best she could. But the overseer pointed at the baby and said, "Keep that thing quiet!" And the driver come over with his whip, gonna whip that baby, and she turned, but the whip caught the baby, and the child cried out as any hurt child would. And Sarah was there on the ground, trying her best to comfort her, and nobody came to help her, except Toby. He came over, and she said, "Father, I've got to go." And he said, "Soon, child, soon." And he helped her up, got that baby on her back, and went back to his work. But then Sarah, she just gave up. And she laid down there in the road. And the overseer cried out, "Get up, you old black cow!" And the driver came over and whipped his whip across her legs, cut through her skirt into her skin. Nobody came to help her, said Toby. Toby came over and extended his arms to her. And she said, "I've got to go, Father, before it's too late." And he said, "All right then, child. Go. How you know how to go." And he stepped back from her, extended his hands, and started saying words, magic words. So quick and so fast that they just sounded like whispers, whispers. And then Sarah stood up off our back, climbed up on the air, and then flew away with her child. The overseer started chasing after her on his horse and tried to grab her. He just missed her. She was up and away, over the fields, over the fences, over the trees. Nothing could grab her now. She was gone. Nobody could believe it. But then that was there. So that it was. The next day was so hot in the fields that a young man fell over from the heat. And then another, and then another, and then another. And Toby put down his hoe and stood there and extended his arms and said the magic word. And those young men rose up like black sticks shining in the sun, whirling, and then they flew away. And then Toby turned towards the rest of the field and started saying their words. And there was a great outcry. His bent backs stood straight, and they gathered in a circle. Men and women, children, old, they all held hands in a circle like they was going to ring sing. But they didn't dance, and they didn't sing. They rose up on the air and started flying over the fields and the fences. And they were gone. The overseer pointed at Toby. Seize him! He's the one what been saying them magic words. And he came over on his horse. The driver came with the whip. The master came with his gun. They were going to kill old Toby. And Toby just stood there and laughed. Don't you know who some of us in this field is? We're the ones who can fly. He rose up in the air. And even though he was their leader, he followed after them, flying over the fields. The overseer told it. The master, he said it was a trick of the light. And the driver, he kept his mouth shut. But those who were left in the field, who looked after Toby and watched him fly away without saying a word, their eyes said to him, "Take us with you." And he looked back and he said, "I ain't got time to teach you how to fly. You're going to have to wait for your chance to run." And so they waited. And that night in the quarters, they told their children about what they had seen that day, about the people who could fly. And their children grew up and told their children. And they grew up and told their children. And now me. I've told it to you. And if they ask you, was I running? Tell them I was flying. Tell them I was flying. The people who fly by Virginia, as told by Virginia. There is this, yeah, I would think. I want to share this last little story with you, which is not African American, at least as I have heard it. It was the first story I heard after moving from Philadelphia to Girton in western North Carolina. Girton is at the top of the gorge, Hickory Gorge. And my husband and I moved into that little community. And a month or so after we moved in the fall, Back Cave, North Carolina, and yes, that used to be where they would mail all the fan mail for back then. So the answers would have the postmark of Back Cave in North Carolina when they wrote back to the kids. So Back Cave was having a talent show, and we went down to sing and play and our guitar and mandolin, and that was the first time I saw clogging, which is traditional Appalachian percussive dance, a blend of Irish step dance and African step dance. And so we saw clogging there, and it was the first time I heard a storyteller go up to a microphone and tell a story. So I searched for this story because I couldn't quite remember all of it, and my husband couldn't either. I finally found it in a book, and it was called The Crooked Mouth Family in a book. And I've told it a lot because it's a short little story. And I've told it in a place where someone came up afterwards and said, you know, we found a little mountain woman, and we have it archived at our university, you know, in the library. And then I told it another place, and afterwards a Jewish family came up to me and said, we know that story is a Yiddish story. The ending was a little different. And then I told it in our community at home, and Erna Earl came up to me and said, you know, my Danish grandfather used to tell me that story. And I'm just waiting for someone to come up and say, I know an African American who told me this story, because I feel as though this story has been around the world and then some. This is the version that I heard. There was a family lived way up a holler, and they were called the Crooked Mouth family, because everybody in that family had a mouth that was different. The father had an upper lip and an lower lip, like this. The mother had a lower lip, like this. They had 3 children, and the oldest was a boy. And he had a mouth that was way over to the side, like this. And the second child was a girl, and her mouth was way over to the other side of her face, like this. And the youngest was a boy, and his mouth was straight up and down in the middle of his face, like your mouth, like my mouth. But in that family, that was different. Well, these 3 children were very good students. And when the first finished high school, he won a scholarship to the state university. But he didn't go because of his mouth. He figured everybody down there would make his life miserable with the teasing. So he didn't go. The daughter won the same scholarship, turned it down for the same reasons. But the youngest, when he got that scholarship, he took it. And they were so excited. They were going to have a college graduate in their family, so they pulled their money together, got him a set of luggage and a bus ticket, and sent him east. I have no idea where east is around here. And they sent him east to the state university. And he did really well. And he wrote to them and said, you know, we're going to have a fall break, and I'm going to come back and see you all. So they met him at the bus station, rode all the way back up to the holler, where the mother had prepared a feast. She had a really good meal for them, but the special thing was that she had baked a cake. And you didn't always have the sugar and the eggs and, you know, to make a cake. But for this son, it was worth it. So they ate their meal, and the mother, for dessert, brought out the cake. She served the first piece to the father. He took a bite. Mom! young boy, he just grabbed a big old hunk of that cake and stuck it in the side of his mouth. Mom, this is really good. And the sister tried it. And you know how some girls are. She's a little teensy-weensy little in the corner of her mouth. Oh, Mom, it's really tasty. And then the young brother tried it. The way you would or I would. Mom, this is delicious. Thank you for making this cake in my honor. Well, they were staying up late. Later than usual, they would get up with the sun and go to bed with the sun. But they did have a candle. So they lit the candle, finished the cake, washed up the dishes, and then it was time to hit the hay. And someone had to blow out the candle. So the father, he went to blow out the candle. He couldn't blow out the candle. So he said, Mother,
Yes.
blow out the candle.
All right.
Well, do it.
I will.
She couldn't blow out the candle. So she said, Brother. Yes. Yes. Blow out the candle. All right. Well, do it. I will. He couldn't blow out the candle. So he said, Sister,
Yes.
blow out the candle.
All right.
Let's do it.
I will.
She couldn't blow out the candle. So she said,
Brother,
Yes.
blow out the candle.
All right.
Well, do it.
I will. And he blew out the candle. They were all amazed. So they all said together, What a wonderful thing is a college education. I don't know if you have any questions or comments. I certainly had another song, which we normally have time to do, but I wanted to open, open it to the floor. Anyone with questions or comments to share? Yes.
I found it very interesting. Your first three stories all involve death. They involve death, but also with a little lesson. I don't know, when I heard it, it made me realize even young children see adversity in their life, and that in your stories, it still gave me hope that they should try to be kind, and they should try to keep having their effort and their love. And then the last story about the mother and her little child, again, all related a little bit to pain, and yet, in the very end, your story brought it together about the sense of community and hope, so thank you.
Oh, goodness, thank you. And thank you for noticing that, because I will read a lot of stories before I find a story that I want to tell. I'll listen, and love those stories, but there's, a story has to always call to me before I can tell it. And when I first started, I read a lot of African tales, and I found them really gruesome and scary. And that somehow African American tales, they have the same roots, but they're different. I haven't studied how or why they are different. You can look at superficial things like all the Brer Rabbit tales come from hare. They call him, he's a rabbit in Africa, but they call him a hare. And they're elephants, but there are Brer Rabbit is dealing with elephants in a lot of those 400 stories that have been collected. But yes, it's a way of like dealing with the realities of life and still making them something that you can handle emotionally. Yes, it was, yes.
You can tell a story, but not everybody's a storyteller. And there's a big difference between the crafty storytelling
Yes,
and telling a story. So how do you hone your craft?
by telling the story. By telling the story.
I know a lot of people that tell stories over and over again, and they aren't good.
But it's the same story, you know, if they're telling the same story, it will get better and cleaner as they tell it over and over again. Now,
You know different people than I do.
But I do have a background in theater, but I can remember, you know, I love theater and I love telling stories. And I can remember that people were always amazed at how I brought my whole body to it. And I, you know, I've taken, I don't remember a lot of sign language, but I thought, look how these people who aren't losing sound express themselves. So I've taken those classes just to see what I can apply. And of course, movement classes, any dance, anything like that. But then, you know, to craft it, you have to make decisions about what you're going to use from each thing. But thank you, I appreciate that. Yeah.
How do you rehearse things like your facial expressions and your hand movements? Do you watch yourself on video or in the mirror? Or?
I need to learn to do that. I've committed to a coach who really swears by watching herself on video. And she said most artists, especially storytellers, don't like seeing themselves on video. So I'm hoping that Ariel will be able to help me do that. However, I do practice cooking out family in the mirror. And I took this, you know, when I first heard this story, with the swiping of the hand, I got that from Donald O'Connor in Singing in the Rain. When he does, make him laugh. He pushes his face in amazing ways. So it's just, as I tell it, you know, you remember those things and like, oh, I could swipe my hands just like, you know, Donald O'Connor. So that one I do practice, but I really feel uncomfortable. What I love about storytelling as opposed to theater, and love about Chautauqua as opposed to theater, is that I get to connect with the audience. And so that's important to me. Yeah.
Related to that, the bullfrog, you had us do it with you. What gave you that idea? Because I see that as a valuable way.
Yes, I've heard it that way. I've heard it that way. And then I found it in books. It's written that way. So I think just traditionally it was passed on. You know, telling a group of people around the fire and everybody. Thank you. Thank you for participating. This has been a great audience.
Well, this has been wonderful. Becky Stone, thank her.
Yeah.